Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of SEPA Paranormal Chronicles. Tonight, I'm delighted to have this guest with me. She's got a really interesting, cool story to tell us. I'm going to do the introduction, but I'm going to need to take a breath afterwards because it's quite a big introduction. Kathleen Marden, internationally recognized UFO abduction researcher, author, and lecturer. Director of MUFON's Field Investigation Training Program, Director of MUFON's Experiencer Research Team. You're also the recipient of the International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award and currently serves as a MUFON Lifetime Member, Benefactor, and Research Consultant. I'll take a breath now. Kathleen, welcome and thank you for spending some time with me tonight.
Hello, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to do the full introduction, and I've got a sneaking suspicion you might have something to do with UFOs by that introduction.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. Okay, so for those people that don't know, you're the niece of Betty and Barney Hill.
That's right.
We'll get into why they're famous to start off in a little bit. But what we're going to be talking about tonight was 1961. You were 13 years old.
That's right.
I was -4. Yeah, -4. So before we go into what happened on that night, was your interest with the paranormal and UFOs there, or was it that night spurned everything on going forward?
I had absolutely no knowledge or interest in the paranormal or UFOs prior to September 20th, 1961. I was an average farm girl in southern New Hampshire, lived across the street from my grandparents who had dairy cows and chickens, and spent a lot of time over there with them. And my grandfather had been a selectman in the town. My grandmother helped as a welfare agent. So, we were a politically oriented family. My father was the scoutmaster. My brother, I had two brothers. They were heavily involved in scouting. I was in 4-H, that kind of thing. That's what our lives were like back then.
Okay. And then the night of the 19th, 20th of September, 1961 changed everything.
It did. It absolutely did.
Before we go into that story, I'm going to ask you a personal-ish question. At what point after that date did you hear about it, and what was your first thoughts after you heard it?
I heard about that on September 20th, the day that Betty and Barney arrived home. They had their sighting on the night of September 19th. They had their close encounter at about midnight, and then the abduction or the missing time event that they later realized was an abduction occurred just after midnight for a couple of hours on September 20th. So it was on September 20th when I arrived home from school that my mother was on the phone with my Aunt Betty and having a conversation about the sighting and also about the concern that the craft had been so close to them that they might have been contaminated. And so I was very interested in immediately what craft, what happened there? What do you mean contaminated? My mother said, oh, well, she had to call a neighbor when he arrived home from work. He was a physicist because she wanted to give Betty and Barney some information and guidance from this physicist. And I said to my mother, well, in school, we didn't learn anything about this. we've learned about our solar system, but we don't think any of those planets are inhabited. And that was the extent of my knowledge.
that, that's fun. And it's, yeah, even though there's a couple of years difference between yourself and me, this is still the generation where you didn't normally speak about this kind of thing publicly because people would think that you were crazy.
That's correct. And I was sworn to secrecy. The whole family was sworn to secrecy. So we didn't tell people. We knew the consequences.
Yeah. So, at what point did you get the chance to speak to Betty and Barney to kind of get their side of the story, bearing in mind they're telling a 13-year-old?
Well, my mother, father, two brothers, and I traveled the 19 miles from my childhood home to Betty's and Barney's house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a couple of days after that phone call. And that's when I heard the story directly from Betty, um, and went out and saw the shiny spots on the trunk of the car that had not been there the day before their event and were only there after this craft hovered over their vehicle and they heard code like buzzing sounds, a series of them that sounded like, as Barney said, a tuning fork had been dropped. So yeah, we were there a couple of days later, and Barney was different. He was usually very gregarious. We had a great time with him as children, but on that particular day, he was sitting in the living room quietly, waiting for a phone call, I suppose, from the Air Force. And my father sat next to him and they quietly talked.
Yeah, because like I say, yeah, it's still a taboo subject in the 60s and right up to even the 80s, and that's when it kind of really started to come to light. Yeah, some of the movies that came out, Close Encounters and such like, so people started talking about it more. But how long did you have to keep it secret for?
Uh, I'm trying to think. For all of my life until there was a violation of confidentiality. And it was 1965. No, the first week in last week in October. Yeah, it started October 25th, 1965, when John Luttrell published 5 articles in the Boston Traveler. And that was huge news. It went around the world. I have a printout from a newspaper in Australia that his articles went to. So this was big news. Betty and Barney were extraordinarily distressed. They thought they were going to lose their jobs. It was very, very difficult for them.
So we've kind of touched on the subject and we've kind of mentioned a couple of things. So from start to finish, can you kind of give me a timeline of events that Betty and Barney encountered?
Okay, on the night of September 19th?
Well, yeah. So from the first thing that they saw, right through to when they got home.
Okay. This was on the third day of their trip, and they were going to stay in Montreal, but they went on to upstate New Hampshire and south of Colebrook, around Lancaster. I want to say Groveton, but Groveton was the first where they estimated they were. They went up and realized that it wasn't Groveland, that it was actually south of Lancaster, town of Lancaster. And so you'd have to look at a New Hampshire map to see that. But this is when Betty saw a new light in the sky. And about a half hour later, they were down at Twin Mountain. And Betty was telling Barney to stop the car She wanted to get a look at this, and he said, Betty, I just want to go home and keep driving. And she said, but Delcy, the dog, has to go. She needs to be walked. So Barney stopped the car and walked Delcy. Well, Betty looked through binoculars. Barney looked through binoculars. He was a confirmed skeptic. He did not believe this was possible. So he was kind of poo-pooing the entire thing. He said, oh, it's probably a Piper Club or a commercial airliner heading toward Canada. But the odd thing was that it just shot back at him. And he then knew that it wasn't. They continued on. They entered Franconia Notch, beautiful scenic area, mountains on both sides. There's a stream that runs down on one side of it as well. They cross over the Hugh Gallen Bridge, and they have a really good look at Cannon Mountain. And they see the craft ahead of them flying over the top of the mountain. And then they drive down a little bit further. They're a mile south of Cannon Mountain at the old man of the mountain, and they see that the craft has come out and descended, and it's now hovering beside the profile of the old man in the mountain, which is 48 feet from a forehead to chin line. And they realized that this craft was at least as long as that profile, but Betty estimated 1.5 times to 2 times the length of that profile. The craft would flip up on its side. It appeared to be rotating. It would flip down, would flip up again, and flip down again. Very erratic behavior. And so they looked at it through binoculars, and Barney described it, the movement at one time, as bouncing back and forth in the sky like a yo-yo.
Right.
It goes out and then it comes back. It reminds me of how the military pilots said it looked like a ping pong ball, the one that they saw bouncing
right.
back.
Gotcha.
So they proceeded south, continuing very slowly to look at this craft. And then they're on Route 3 at the time. Route 95 had not been constructed yet that far north. So they're on Route 3. They exit the south entrance of Franconia Notch, and now that they're in an area called Indian Head, and it's in Lincoln, New Hampshire. There's a stone facade that looks like an Indian profile.
Okay.
So Iroquois kind of profile. And so there were cabins there, and it's the first sign of, the tourist area. Barney said under hypnosis, they're out of the barren hostility of the wooded area. And he feels relieved. And they're driving along now, and Betty's becoming excited because this craft is swooping down. She wants Barney to stop the car. He looks up, he sees that it's swooping down, and he stops directly in the middle of the highway because the craft is now hovering only a couple of 100 feet over the right side of the highway, which would be the western side of the highway. And Barney stopped the car. Betty's looking up at it. Barney grabs the binoculars. He opens the door. He steps out of the car, and he's resting his elbows on the roof of the car, looking up at the craft. And he sees a row of very brightly lighted windows. It's almost like a mercury vapor ramp, intense blue-white light. And there's a little red light that seems to be showing on each side of the craft. He steps back for a less encumbered view, and when he does, the craft passes over the highway in front of the car. He walks away, leaving the door open, the interior light on in the car, and he walks toward this craft, which is now hovering about 100 feet overhead and about 50 feet away from him, he estimated, in this field. And he put the binoculars up to his eyes, and he saw figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms staring down at him. Suddenly, all but one turned in unison toward what he thought was some kind of a panel. Their arms went up. He could now see them from their knees up to their arms being raised. And as when that happened, fin-like structures with those red lights on the ends slid out, little fin-like structures. And he's looking up at this one, staring down at him, and he's terrified by the looks of this individual, so terrified that he had a mental block at that point for what his features looked like. He
I
remembered
think
the
I would.
black shiny uniforms,
Yeah.
and something's dropping down out of the bottom of the craft, and he pulls the binoculars away from his eyes so forcefully that he broke the leather strap and went screaming back to the car, feet pounding the pavement on the road, to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. As he entered the car, he looked back and the craft was coming in his direction. He went speeding down the highway, maybe a half mile to a mile, and then he and Betty heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds that I already told you earlier sounded like a tuning fork had been dropped.
Yeah.
He said there were around maybe 7 of those buzzing sounds, rhythmic. And then when that happened, the car vibrated. Betty touched the metal on the car because she sensed that there was some kind of an electrical charge there. But fortunately, she wasn't electrocuted. And, then, the car is vibrating and they have this tingling sensation that comes over them and they lose their memory. Everything becomes very, very vague. And they have spotty memories for what happened in the interim. But they find themselves now 35 miles down the highway. And they're ready to go onto a ramp onto the interstate. And there is another series of buzzing sounds. They don't see the craft this time. Betty turns to Barney and says, "Now do you believe in flying saucers?" And he says, "Betty, don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing." And he said, "I will prove to you that I can make that sound with this car." So he stops the car on the highway and he starts driving from one side of the road to the other and doing everything he can to make that sound. And it was impossible. He couldn't do it. And then Betty had more memories than Barney, but they had vague memories of finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees lining the road, of a fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground, and of a roadblock. They didn't know where or when that occurred, but they looked for it for years. They started in the fall of 1961 and looked for it on that spring when the snow had melted, and on and on and on. They didn't find it until after they had hypnosis, and in over Labor Day weekend in September of 1965, they finally found that spot.
Wow. The fact that you've just told me that story, I think, yeah, if anybody's loves to investigate or research UFOs, for that to happen to an individual nowadays, they'll be going, as soon as they recovered, it would be like, right, notepad, and they'll be writing down all the details of what they could remember.
Yes.
But it's such a fascinating story with the fact that they lost time. with the fact that there were strange noises that could not be replicated, I imagine for both of them it was a very difficult scenario for them to comprehend what had happened.
It was difficult. And when they arrived home, they were really concerned. They felt grimy, very, very dirty for, just having driven from just west of Montreal home. And they felt that they'd been contaminated. They wouldn't take their suitcases in the house. They threw away everything they had in their picnic cooler. They took a lot of precautions and were very concerned about their own health and that of their dog too. And so, that was their response. Betty was very curious because she had no idea about what she saw. So she went to the Portsmouth Public Library and took out the first book she had ever read on the topic. And there was an address in the book. The address was for Donald Kehoe, who was the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And she sat down with Barney and she wrote a letter to him on September 26th, just a few days after this happened. And so in that letter, she showed that erratic pattern. She wrote about the figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms. She wrote that they were considering finding a psychiatrist who could do hypnosis to hypnotize Barney because of the problems that he was having. This was immediate. There's been a lot of false information disseminated. So people might say, oh, she doesn't have it right. Look, I've been on this case since I was 13. I've investigated every little detail. I'm the trustee of the estate. I set up their archival collection at the University of New Hampshire. I worked with nuclear physicist Stanton T. Friedman on this investigation as well. So, I worked with the best. I have the best knowledge. And I get really disappointed when I read articles online where people are using scientists and things that scientists have said, skeptical scientists, and then changing Betty's and Barney's information. So that part of it is inaccurate. Certain details have been changed.
Yeah.
And it's very kind of frustrating and disappointing to see that happening. Among people who call themselves investigators, among people who call themselves writers, professional writers, it's just they need to do their homework.
Yeah. And one thing that I learned extremely quickly by doing these podcasts, and I've spoken to people about UFOs, about cryptids, about theories, and about ghosts and spirits. It's not up to me to say if somebody's lying or not, because it's a personal experience that they've had, and you want to hear their story. I'm not the person who's going to go, well, I think you're lying, because I've got no evidence of that.
Right.
That's just
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I love talking to people that have these stories, because it makes me a better person to do these podcasts, because I'm learning every single time. And something that you said a couple of minutes ago about you being the person that's got the best knowledge, after seeing, I can't remember which UFO show it was, but after seeing that particular episode, it's like, I'm going to reach out to Kathleen. And that's when I sent you the email. But I love it that we've got somebody that has done, that has basically, crossed the T's and dotted the I's with regard to this. And like I say, I'm not going to go to a third party to get the information. I'm going to go straight to the source, and you are that source. So I know they mentioned that there was like a few years before they really got investigated and analysed. So from 1961 to 1965, is that correct?
Well, not really. Walter
Oh,
Webb, they reported this to the Air Force immediately. I have those reports. You'll find them on my website, kathleen-marden.com. Betty uh, uh, had written to NICAP, and Walter Webb, a NICAP investigator who was also a scientist, he was an astronomer at the Hayden Planetarium in Boston, came and he did an investigation for NICAP immediately. So there's
right.
his
Okay.
investigative report published in October of 1965. It was confidential.
Right.
It was not made public. This all became public in 1965. There were other investigators, Robert Homan, C.D. Jackson, a number of people, Jacques Vallée looking into this, Alan Hynek. There were other people who were involved in this very, very quietly. But in 1965, a friend of Betty's spilled the beans uh, to a newspaper reporter from a
Right.
Boston newspaper. And he contacted Betty and Barney. I have the letter. He said, if you will speak to me, I promise you that I will not commercialize this in any way. And Betty and Barney said, absolutely not. We don't want anyone to know about this, and it's confidential, period. We're not going to speak to you. So he did his own investigation and somehow convinced other investigators who knew about the case that Betty and Barney were coming forward with their story, which was complete baloney. And
Right.
let me say, he did a good investigation. I have his articles still. He did a good investigation, and he even was able to identify an Air Force cover up when the original report arrived in Dayton, Ohio at Project Blue Book. They launched a cover up. And in 1965, they rewrote the original report and took out the interesting information.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yes.
It's it is kind of strange how the governments, the air forces, the military think that we're not capable of understanding what's going on. So, it's not the first time you've heard of cover ups. Yeah, it's not the first time that, Roswell. Oh, it was a weather balloon. Okay, whatever.
Oh, that was a popular cover up explanation.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's sort of like it's only now, and if you can take as gospel what's floating around the news about releasing all these files, let's not get political, but that could be just being a way to divert the attention away from something else. But it's sort of like, how can we convince Joe Public that what happened didn't happen? And it's crazy and ridiculous all at the same time.
Well, yes, but there has been a great effort to convince John and Jane Q. Public that this did not happen
Yeah.
with false information, with character assassination, with statement by Dr. Benjamin Simon that he believed that it was Betty's dreams. She had 5 dreams, nightmares, after she wrote them down. Barney didn't want to hear them, but he overheard her speak to Walter Webb, so he knew some of it. And so Dr. Simon said, well, that was his best explanation because he didn't have scientific evidence that this could be real. He had to look at the best alternative explanation that he could come up with. There was no folie à deux. There was no psychiatric illness. There was no hoaxing. Who would want to go and pay a psychiatrist for visits for 6 months to hoax something, and then
Very good
and
point.
then and then keep it secret?
Yeah, yeah,
So
sort of like.
yeah. So anyway, there have been many, many things said. They say that there's no scientific evidence. Well, there is evidence that has been examined in scientific laboratories, but when they say there's no scientific evidence, they mean that nature and science have not published a peer-reviewed journal on any of the scientific studies that have been done on Betty's and Barney's evidence. And so if you want to qualify it in that way, which is a very narrow definition, in my opinion,
Yeah,
you can qualify it that way. But Betty's dress was torn in several places. Completely inexplicable until after the hypnosis sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon, which, by the way, he did separately and reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, so Betty and Barney couldn't share information. And so in the hypnosis sessions, she remembered. She didn't state it, but she told me after that she remembered how her dress was torn. She remembered how the zipper had been broken, that kind of thing.
yeah.
It's all
Like you,
encaptured, the Betty and Barney Hill
yeah.
UFO experience that I wrote with Stanton Friedman.
Okay, yeah, and it's like what you mentioned earlier about the binocular strap.
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of. So, what was the deciding factor that made them decide that okay, this is the right time? We're going to go and visit this hypnotist. What was the deciding factor for that decision?
Well, they had already gone to visit a psychiatrist in Massachusetts at Baldpate, and this was like a year after this happened. And he said, I don't want to hypnotize you now because you're going to start to remember more of what happened. And you'll remember more and more. And they did. But then what Barney was remembering was so deeply distressing to him that he developed bleeding ulcers. He ended up in the hospital with these bleeding ulcers. He had to take a leave of absence from work. And he was talking to the psychiatrist. People thought, well, perhaps it was his adjustment moving from Philadelphia to New Hampshire, going from a Black community to a white community, marrying a white woman. Portsmouth had Black residents as well, and Pease Air Force Base was right there, so there were plenty of Black servicemen. But anyway, finally that was sort of dismissed. He made a good adjustment to his life in New Hampshire. The primary cause was what had happened on that night of September 19, 1961. And so he was referred by the psychiatrist to Dr. Benjamin Simon. Dr. Simon was very good at treating the kind of problem that Barney had with this deep degree of anxiety and really trauma related to this event that he had. And so Dr. Simon had set up the Mason General Hospital on Long Island during World War II to treat veterans who were suffering from shell shock, conversion hysteria, who were returning from the war, and very successfully treated them using deep trance hypnosis. It was a method that he had developed. And so he earned quite a reputation. He was the head of a psychiatric organization. He taught at Harvard, at Yale, Just a really outstanding history. And so Barney was referred to him because he was the best person to help Barney. And
Right.
Betty went along with him and said that she would like to be hypnotized too. And so he said that he would take her as well.
Moral support. I think that's what it's called. So, yeah, I'm not
Yes.
going by myself. You come too. So, when obviously you mentioned earlier that they had two separate um, hypnosis sessions, how far apart were these two sessions for Betty and Barney? Was it in the same week? Was it like weeks apart or hours apart? Or
Well, there were more than 2 sessions. There were 10
no?
sessions in all. So each of them had 5 sessions.
Okay,
Um, he would take generally Barney, and then a week later he'd take Betty, and then he'd go back to Barney, and then he'd go back to Betty. And he reinstated amnesia so they couldn't talk to each other. And they were in a soundproof room, so they did not hear what the other one was saying.
and it's interesting that he reinstated the amnesia because then yeah in this day and age, people would go, "Oh well, they compared notes afterwards,
Right.
to get the stories." But if he reinstated the amnesia, then that's not possible.
That's right.
And
And
yeah,
Dr. Simon was a skeptic, so he wasn't leading them to a
yeah,
story. In fact, he was leading them away from it, trying to convince them there had to be another explanation.
and how related were the two stories at separate times? Was it kind of exactly the same, or was Barney saying stuff that Betty didn't, and vice versa? How did the stories compare during the different hypnosis sessions?
Well, I transcribed the hypnosis tapes and I did a line by line comparative analysis of Betty and Barney's statements to Dr. Simon. Their statements coincided from the beginning of their trip all the way through. And for the UFO sighting, for the close encounter, for everything. And then when they were separate, I had to take what each of them said about the abduction itself. There were little discrepancies here and there, which I think sort of came together by the end of the hypnosis sessions. And I found discrepancies uh, which were just memory problems in the hypnosis sessions, um, where usually Barney forgot something
Yeah,
or had the sequence mixed up. And then he would straighten that out later when
yeah.
he realized that he was wrong.
And it's
So, but all in all, Betty's narrative was more detailed than Barney's. He chose to keep his eyes closed, to stay very, very still because he was afraid he would be harmed if he didn't. And essentially, they had the same types of exams.
okay. It's interesting what you say about having small discrepancies because I've been lucky enough in the job that I'm doing now to go on interviewing members of the public. And if you interview two people and their story is 100% identical, they're lying.
Mhm.
There has
Well
to be
rehearsed.
exactly, and there has to be natural discrepancies because not everybody has the same memory. So for there to be discrepancies, yeah, that's a big green check in my book as far as I'm concerned, because it means it's coming from a natural source rather than a rehearsed source.
Mhm. I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So
saying that.
you're most welcome. So last year I interviewed Preston Dennett. I'm sure you've met
Oh,
him
sure,
once
I
or
know
twice.
Preston. Yes,
And
he's a close
he
colleague.
yeah, and when he was telling me about his abduction, he was able to describe the interior of the craft that he was in. Was Betty and Barney able to do the same kind of description, or was that a little bit of a grey area, so to speak?
No, they described it. They described what they saw in the room that they were in. They described the walls, the lighting, the table. They described everything.
So you mentioned that they had uh, multiple hypnosis sessions each.
Yes.
Did they find that after each session they could, even though the amnesia was uh, put back in, so to speak, did they feel better for talking about it after each session? Did their character get stronger, so to speak, or were they still as confused about what had happened?
I don't think that they felt better after each session. In fact, um, Barney started to have nightmares for the first time. He hadn't
Right.
had nightmares that he could remember about that. Betty had some nightmares too. She hadn't had any since the 5 nights after they had their abduction, or I should say, their close encounter. She didn't know
Yeah.
about the abduction at the time.
So,
So yeah, that's what happened.
so let's speak about these nightmares. Can How clear were they, and what kind of nightmares were they?
They were sort of disaster type nightmares during the hypnosis, where there would be loads and loads of UFOs in the sky, and everything was burning up, and like kind of like a Holocaust, things falling.
I, I, I don't know what to say to that. It's sort of like, nope. So, because I know that when people do hypnotize and they have like a regression, you know, information comes out that the individual wasn't aware of, didn't know about. So, was there any significant points that were coming out during the hypnosis sessions that they'd completely forgot about, or they it was pointed out after the session that, wow, this is this is a like a smoking gun. This is a deciding factor kind of thing.
Let me think.
I'll put you on the spot now.
Well, there's something that I want to talk about that I think is important.
Okay.
During the hypnosis session, Betty remembered that after um, the examiner had left the room to go examine Barney, who was in a separate room, that she put her dress back on, and she started to walk around. The leader told her to look around as she wanted to. And she found, it was like a tablet. She called it a book. But in the year 2000, I asked her all about that book, to describe it to me and to sketch the symbols that she saw inside it, because she saw vertical rows of symbols. And that was always a curiosity, is this part of her imagination or what? But then Dr. Don C. Donderi from Montreal, from McGill University, psychology department, an experimental psychologist, worked with Dr. Stuart Appel from the State University of New York and some students, and they did 2 studies on alien symbols that Bud Hopkins had collected and kept in his files dating back to the mid 1970s. And they did these symbols, these studies, to compare on a statistical scale how alike or different the symbols were. They had a control group. They had hypnotized a group of students and told them they'd been on a craft. They saw symbols and they should draw them. So they had all of that data that Dr. Donderi analyzed using this scale. And what the scientists discovered was that the symbols of those who believed they'd been abducted were so similar and so different than the control groups that they believed that UFO abduction might be real. So Dr. Donderi contacted me and asked me if it would be all right for him to analyze Betty's symbols. This is a few years later, after my book Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience was released. And so I told him, yes, please do. And he came back and he said that some of Betty's symbols were nearly identical to the symbols that Bud Hopkins had been collecting dating back to the mid 1970s. So I found that really quite extraordinary too.
Very, very. And yeah, how fascinating would it be if we could actually translate those? That would be. So that's your next book, to translate all those symbols.
I'm not smart enough to do that, I'm afraid.
So after all this that happened within your family, at what point in your life did you decide, I'm going to look into this and I'm going to commit like my life to it, so to speak?
It was 1991 when I formally entered into an investigation. I had been investigating it kind of casually for many years. But then in 1991, I joined the Mutual UFO Network and I trained to become a field investigator. And I used those skills to begin my investigation of Betty's and Barney's case. And I did this for many, many years. And so that's the way that I have all of this information. And then I met Stanton. I knew Stanton Friedman. I'd met him for the first time back in the 1970s. But he was speaking at an event that I was attending. And I spoke to him and told him about the book that I was writing and asked him if he'd be interested in writing about the star map. And so we talked and talked. He came and he saw Betty's collection that I had at my house at that point. And after he looked at everything and at my work, he decided that he was going to tell me all about his scientific knowledge of the star map, which, I needed him to do because I certainly I was not an astronomer, nor was Stanton, but he was a physicist. And there were astronomers and astrophysicists and statisticians who looked at Betty's star map and Marjorie Fish's identification of the stars on Betty's map. So I learned a great deal about that as well, and even more since Stanton has passed away, because now I'm the one who has to speak about it.
Right. And is this the, am I going to say it correct, the Zeta Reticuli system? Is that
I call it Zeta Reticuli.
Okay.
So did Stanton. I followed Stanton's lead.
Yeah. So what do we know about that location?
Oh, it's a little over 39 light years away. It's in an area of our galaxy where there's an abundance of exoplanets that around stars, that these exoplanets could be life-bearing planets. There was an update on that map. And you'll see that too in Captured, my book. It was actually a student of astrophysics who did this as a class project and used something like 2,500, well over 2,000 computer models, and was highly skeptical. But at the end said that Marjorie Fish's identification was the closest of any place in our galactic neighborhood. There was only a problem that this young astrophysicist believed that there were a couple of stars that might have been a better match than the stars that Marjorie identified. And it wasn't like just looking at a constellation in the sky. Um, there were certain properties about these stars. They were all in a plane. So if you want to go from one star system to another, you're not jumping back and forth and back and forth the light years. You are just skipping from one to another.
Right.
So that's a very important thing to consider. Also, they discovered that all the stars on Betty's map were sun-like stars, the ones connected by lines. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space were on Betty's map. So that was quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And for somebody like that to be able to create these maps, like you say, unless they're a physicist, an astrologist, it's going to be nigh on impossible. Mm-hmm. So, where did this information? How did this information get into Betty's brain? There's got to be something that happened, because you're not just going to start drawing star charts and they're going to be exact, like thousands and thousands of light years away. So something must have happened for her to be able to replicate this star system.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, there's like one chance in 10,000 that she could have done this as confabulation and gotten what she came up with, and there was a match. But I don't know about that specific match with the stars being in a plane and all of the special characteristics that those stars have. In that time frame, back in the 70s, scientists, astronomers believed that stars like Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which are a binary star system, could not hold planets in a stable orbit because they were too close together. Well, later they discovered that, yes, they could. So, and some people are still using the binary star system excuse.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, we lost Barney in 1969.
Yes.
See, I've got my information. I've got my information here. It's just like, I just need to quick read it. How did the loss of Barney affect Betty with regard to their experience? Did she open up more? Did she close in more? How did that kind of affect her?
Well, let me first say that there was more than just Barney's death. There was a psychological operation taking place against Betty. I moved into her house, and I saw it myself. The house was being entered repeatedly, and weird things were being done to freak her out. Somebody was trying to push her over the edge, but she was a very stable individual and tough as nails. And they couldn't do that, but that changed her. She became more committed to what happened to her, to seeking answers, to doing experiments. Her health failed, but you can imagine, with all the stress of constantly being bombarded by people who are assaulting your character, who are lying about you, who are all over the place talking about what a nut you are, that it is going to take a toll on you. She 100%. Ended up leaving she was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She left that position early for health problems, and so devoted more time to UFOs. She became an investigator, investigated some abduction cases, helped a lot of the abductees, the early abductees, such as Travis Walton, Charlie Hickson, Calvin Parker, 3 women from Kentucky, a few of those people who were able to get in touch with her seeking help. So she became a resource for people and an investigator and experimenter.
And I'm assuming that the fact that she became an investigator, you kind of grasped that with open arms and thought, that's what I want to do too.
Yes, it wasn't Betty's investigations. It was the other investigators who came, like Jacques Fillet, like I'm trying to think, different investigators from NICAP who came to our house, who I saw in action. Dr. James Harder, University of California, at Berkeley. He was an engineer there. And people like that really impressed me. And I thought, boy, someday I want to do that because this is becoming more and more fascinating.
And that's it. And it's a subject that continues to give. Yeah, it's not a case of you read a book, you open the first page, and then when you get to the last page, you close it. There's more and more information like coming every single day with regard to UFOs, UAPs, USOs, and it's like I say, it just continues to give, and until we literally get like Independence Day kind of happening, we're getting big spaceship, and it comes to a point where people go, oh, okay, they are real. Then there's always going to be these stories coming in, and like I say, each time somebody tells a story, we're going to be getting that more and more information.
Yes, yeah, and I trained. I was the founder of MUFON's experiencer research team, which is now resource team, and did that job for 10 years. And when I left, we had 45 people who were talking to experiencers. We sort of ran it as a triage kind of unit, and they would have an investigation if they wanted one by the investigative groups from the States. And it was really a great experience. I have retired from doing that now. I'm older and time to slow down and spend more of my twilight years with my husband. But I remain active doing interviews, television shows, movies, stuff like that.
One thing that I enjoy telling people is at the beginning of last year, when I first started doing a podcast, I was speaking to a guy from the UK, a guy called Philip Kinsella.
Oh, I know Philip. Yes.
Yeah. And like he's talking and he was trying to remember a date and he goes, oh yeah, that's about the time that I was abducted. And I went, Philip, you can't just drop that into conversation. So Philip's going to be coming back to talk about that sometime. But so, oh yeah, so I should just drop it into conversation. So we are coming towards the end. Unfortunately, I could talk to you all night, but there's one thing that I found out that I'm really intrigued about. All I'm going to say is 2 words, and I'm hoping you know what I talk about. Strange arrivals.
Yes. Yeah.
Demi Moore and Coleman Domingo.
Yeah.
Are going to be playing Betty and Barney.
Yes. I don't know anything about that, only that it's going to happen. They've never consulted with me. No one's ever contacted me. So, and they say that it's going to be a work of fiction. So I hope that it doesn't, distort the information even more than it's already been distorted in the media.
Yeah, and to hear you say that is extremely disappointing because we both know what Hollywood is like.
Oh yes.
And unfortunately, they bend the truth just a little bit.
Sometimes more than a little.
I was being polite. You can go.
I wasn't.
So Kathleen, where can people get your books and where can they find more information on Betty and Barney?
All of my books are available in all formats on Amazon. most of them on Barnes and Noble and other online bookstores. You can learn more about Betty and Barney by going to my website at kathleen-marden.com, or by reading Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, updated for their 60th anniversary. And the book was by nuclear physicist and ufologist Stanton T. Friedman and myself.
Oh, I'm going to have to go out and get one now. You've sold me. I will add it to my collection of paranormal books.
Well, great. I want to see it on the bookshelf the next time I talk to you.
Okay, I will order it and I'll take a photograph and I'll send it to you to go, look, I've got the book. Kathleen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I was so excited when you said that you would come on the podcast, because we don't get these stories very often. So for you to come on and to share all about Betty and Barney, I thank you.
My pleasure.
For now, yeah, it's like, no, yes, I'll say it's been your pleasure, but it's been my pleasure to have you as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
You enjoy that Florida weather, and let's not mention how wet and cold it is in Canada right now, because I'm going to argue. But you have a great rest of the evening, and thank you once again. Take care.
Yes, thank you so much.